top 5 people Timothy Busfield disappointed the most.
For most of his career, Timothy Busfield represented something rare in Hollywood: reliability. He played thoughtful men, decent husbands, colleagues you could trust. Audiences over 60 remember him from 30-something, and later from The West Wing, not as a star who demanded attention, but as one who earned quiet respect. He was never known for scandals, feuds, or excess, and that is why the shock, when it came, felt so severe. One legal crisis was enough to collapse an entire image built over decades, but the deepest damage was not professional, it was personal. Because this time, the fallout did not land on him alone. It landed on the woman America still sees as family, Melissa Gilbert. For viewers over 60, this is not just another celebrity marriage under pressure. Melissa Gilbert is not seen as a distant Hollywood figure. She is remembered as Laura Ingalls, the child who grew up on American television alongside them, the symbol of decency, resilience, and moral clarity. When Timothy Busfield became her husband, many felt she had finally found a partner who matched that image: calm, supportive, and unthreatening. Their relationship was presented as mature and stable, a late-life union built on shared values rather than glamour. That is precisely why the legal scandal surrounding Busfield hit so hard. In this context, the alleged misconduct did not remain confined to court documents or headlines. It immediately transformed into a moral dilemma played out in public. Busfield's reputation had always been that of a good man, someone who never embarrassed the people around him. The accusation shattered that perception overnight. And for Melissa Gilbert, the damage was immediate. She did not choose the spotlight this time. It found her. Every photograph, every public appearance, every silence was scrutinized. The question, dominating conversations among older audiences, was brutally simple. How could Laura Ingalls end up here? The emotional weight of this conflict lies in humiliation rather than anger. Gilbert's public persona has always been rooted in integrity. The idea that her husband might have betrayed those values felt personal to viewers who grew up trusting her. Many did not express sympathy for Busfield. Instead, their outrage was protective. He was not just accused of wrongdoing, he was accused of dragging her into disgrace. In the eyes of this audience, that was the greater offense. A scandal can ruin a career, but it can also stain a legacy built on goodness. And that legacy belonged to Melissa, not to him. Behind the scenes, the strain would have been suffocating. Standing by a spouse under legal scrutiny is never simple, but doing so while carrying the weight of public expectation is far more brutal. If Gilbert chose loyalty, she risked being seen as complicit or naive. If she chose distance or divorce, she risked confirming the worst assumptions about the marriage. There was no path that led away from judgment. Every option came with loss. For Busfield, this meant confronting a truth few men anticipate. His actions, real or alleged, were no longer about him. They had become a referendum on his wife's dignity. This is why the relationship with Melissa Gilbert sits at the top of the list. It is not fueled by rivalry, ego, or ambition. It is fueled by disappointment. Viewers who once welcomed Busfield as a safe presence now question whether they ever truly knew him. The pain here is quiet but profound. It is the pain of trust broken, not between celebrities, but between a public and a figure they felt belonged to their own family. And in that sense, the scandal did not simply threaten a marriage, it threatened something far more fragile: the illusion that some people are immune to moral collapse. For anyone who remembers The West Wing, the name Aaron Sorkin is inseparable from its moral authority. The series was not just entertainment, it was a statement about integrity, intelligence, and public service. Every line of dialogue carried intention. Every character represented a value. Timothy Busfield, as Danny Concannon, fit seamlessly into that world. He embodied credibility. He looked like a man you could trust with the truth. For years, that image endured. And then, suddenly, it became fragile. Sorkin has always been famously intolerant of anything that threatens the purity of his work. He does not separate the art from the people who represent it. In his view, actors are not interchangeable vessels, they are extensions of the message. When one of them becomes a liability, the entire structure is at risk. That is what makes Busfield's legal scandal so dangerous in this context. It is not merely a personal crisis, it is a reputational contaminant. For a creator as protective as Sorkin, that distinction matters. The tension here is not built on shouting or insults. It is built on silence and exclusion. As news of the case spread, questions emerged quietly but insistently. Would Busfield still be welcome at reunions? Would his name be mentioned in retrospectives? Would the character of Danny Concannon be celebrated without hesitation, or would it be cautiously avoided? For a man who values moral clarity, Sorkin does not need to issue public condemnation. Distance itself is judgment. And for an actor whose identity is tied to a beloved role, that distance cuts deeply. From Sorkin's perspective, the logic is brutal but consistent. The West Wing was built as an aspirational vision of leadership. Any association that undermines that vision must be severed. Busfield's past professionalism offers little protection once the narrative shifts. In this scenario, loyalty to the show outweighs loyalty to the man. That is not cruelty, it is curation. And Sorkin has always curated his legacy with an iron hand. For audiences over 60, this rupture feels especially bitter. They remember the West Wing as a refuge of decency in turbulent times. The idea that one of its trusted faces might now represent betrayal feels like a personal loss. Busfield's fall does not just affect his career, it retroactively stains a memory many hold dear. That is why Sorkin's reaction, whether spoken aloud or not, carries such emotional weight. He is seen not as an antagonist, but as a guardian forced to act. This conflict earns its place on the list because it shows how quickly respect can be revoked when image and morality collide. Busfield is not being punished for incompetence or ego. He is being erased for becoming a symbol of disappointment. In Hollywood, that is often worse. Careers can recover from failure. They rarely recover from shame. And in Sorkin's world, once trust is broken, it is not repaired. It is written out. For viewers who remember 30-something, Timothy Busfield and Ken Olin were once inseparable in spirit. The series captured a generation's anxieties about adulthood, marriage, and ambition, and both men became faces of that emotional realism. Off-screen, they shared more than success. They shared a transition. Like many actors of their era, both quietly prepared for a future behind the camera, understanding that longevity in Hollywood often depended on reinvention. At first, their paths seemed parallel. Over time, they diverged. Ken Olin's move into directing accelerated quickly. His reputation grew not through controversy, but through trust. Studios saw him as steady, emotionally intelligent, and collaborative. That reputation culminated years later with This Is Us, a cultural phenomenon that redefined network television drama and earned Olin immense respect. Busfield also directed, working consistently and competently, but without the same cultural breakthrough. The difference was subtle at first, then undeniable. One former co-star became a creative authority. The other remained admired, but adjacent to greatness rather than at its center. This disparity planted a quiet tension that neither man acknowledged publicly. They remained cordial. There were no interviews filled with bitterness, no visible rivalry. Yet Hollywood has a way of measuring people against the closest comparison, and for Busfield, that comparison was unavoidable. Every success of Olin's underscored what Busfield had not achieved. The shadow was not cruel, but it was persistent. Success, when shared unevenly, can strain even the healthiest friendships. The legal scandal surrounding Busfield transformed that strain into something sharper. Where once there had been parity and shared history, there was now risk. Olin's career was built on emotional authenticity and moral credibility. His work thrived on trust between audiences and characters, between networks and creators. Association with controversy threatened that trust. In such moments, Old bonds are tested not by loyalty, but by calculation. Would standing beside Busfield signal compassion or poor judgment? Would silence be interpreted as abandonment or prudence? For Busfield, this was perhaps the most painful rift of all. Unlike the rupture with Melissa Gilbert, which was rooted in shame, or the distance from Aaron Sorkin, which was professional, this fracture cut at identity. Ken Olin was not a boss or a public guardian of legacy. He was a peer, a reminder of what might have been. Watching a former equal continue forward while he stood still, now burdened by scandal, was a quiet humiliation no courtroom could measure. From the outside, Olin's response appeared restrained. There were no statements, no public gestures of support or condemnation. But restraint itself sends a message. In Hollywood, neutrality is rarely neutral. It is often a decision to protect momentum. For audiences over 60, this silence reads as tragic rather than malicious. They understand that friendships formed in youth do not always survive success and rarely survive disgrace. The disappointment lies not in betrayal, but in inevitability. This conflict earns its place on the list because it illustrates how scandal reshapes perspective. Busfield's fall reframed his past alongside Olin's ascent, turning what once looked like parallel journeys into a before and after contrast. The friendship did not explode. It simply thinned, stretched by distance and circumstance until little remained. And for a man whose career was defined by decency and camaraderie, that thinning may have been the deepest wound of all. It was the realization that when one person falls, even old equals become witnesses rather than allies. For audiences over 60, Martin Sheen is more than an actor. He represents conscience. From Apocalypse Now to The West Wing, Sheen built a public identity rooted in ethics, activism, and accountability. He marched, he protested, he spoke openly about responsibility, both personal and political. Standing beside him on The West Wing, Timothy Busfield benefited from that reflected authority. Their characters existed in the same moral universe. Viewers trusted them together. That shared trust is what made the rupture so unsettling. The conflict here is not documented through shouting matches or lawsuits. It is quieter, and therefore more uncomfortable. When Busfield's legal scandal emerged, it created a moral imbalance within the legacy of The West Wing. Sheen, whose public life has long emphasized accountability, suddenly stood opposite a colleague accused of betraying the very values the show championed. In such a pairing, silence becomes a statement, and Sheen's silence was noticed. Unlike Aaron Sorkin, who curates legacy through authorship, Martin Sheen curates it through example. He has spoken openly about his own past mistakes, including battles with addiction, but always framed recovery through acknowledgement and responsibility. That framework leaves little room for ambiguity. For older viewers, the question was immediate. Would Sheen extend private compassion or public distance? The absence of visible support suggested a line had been drawn not in anger, but in principle. For Busfield, this distance carried a particular sting. Martin Sheen was not just a co-star. He was the moral center of the ensemble, the man audiences looked to for guidance, both on screen and off. Losing proximity to that figure felt like losing a final shield of credibility. If even Martin Sheen did not step forward, what did that say about the seriousness of the situation? In the court of public opinion, Sheen's restraint weighed heavily. From Sheen's perspective, the calculation was likely painful but clear. His career has survived because he aligns words with actions. Supporting someone under legal scrutiny, especially in a scandal involving alleged misconduct, risked diluting decades of carefully maintained moral capital. For a man whose audience spans generations and ideologies, credibility is not negotiable. Compassion, in this context, could remain private. Public association could not. For audiences over 60, this conflict resonates deeply because it mirrors real-life ethical dilemmas. Many have watched friends, colleagues, or public figures fall in ways that force uncomfortable choices. Do you stand beside the person you knew, or the values you claim to hold? Martin Sheen's apparent decision to prioritize principle over loyalty feels both admirable and tragic. It reinforces the sense that Busfield's collapse was not merely professional, but ethical. This conflict earns its place on the list because it completes the picture. Melissa Gilbert represents emotional fallout. Aaron Sorkin represents professional erasure. Ken Olin represents comparative failure. Martin Sheen represents moral judgment. Together, they frame Busfield's downfall not as a single scandal, but as a multi-layered rupture across love, work, friendship, and conscience. When a man known for decency loses the silent approval of someone like Sheen, the loss is profound. Not because of condemnation, but because of absence. And for an audience that values character as much as talent, that absence speaks louder than any accusation. Among the ensemble of The West Wing, Bradley Whitford stood out not only for his performance, but for his voice off-screen. Over the years, he became known as one of Hollywood's most outspoken advocates for accountability, ethics, and social responsibility. Unlike many actors who choose caution, Whitford often chose clarity. He commented on politics, culture, and misconduct with a willingness to risk backlash. That reputation matters when examining his relationship with Timothy Busfield because it introduced a different kind of tension, one rooted not in rivalry or shame, but in public expectation. Busfield and Whitford shared a professional bond built on mutual respect. Their time on The West Wing placed them inside the same moral architecture, a show that argued ideas mattered, that words carried consequences, and that character defined leadership. For years, that shared legacy insulated its cast from cynicism. Viewers believed the people behind the characters embodied something of what they portrayed. When Busfield's legal scandal broke, Whitford found himself in a uniquely uncomfortable position. Silence, for him, would be interpreted as evasion, speech as condemnation. What followed was not a dramatic denunciation, but a shift in tone that longtime observers noticed immediately. Whitford's public comments emphasized accountability and belief in due process, while carefully avoiding personal defense of Busfield. The absence of solidarity spoke volumes. For an actor who had previously defended colleagues in moments of controversy, restraint felt deliberate. It signaled a boundary. Principles would not be bent for friendship. In the ecosystem of the West Wing alumni, that boundary mattered. For Busfield, this restraint carried a particular weight. Whitford was not a superior or a moral elder like Martin Sheen. He was a peer, someone of the same generation, shaped by the same show, judged by the same audience. Losing public alignment with Whitford meant losing the last illusion that the scandal could be reframed as misunderstanding. It suggested that even among equals, there was discomfort. And discomfort, once visible, becomes contagious. From Whitford's perspective, the calculus was stark. His credibility with audiences, especially older viewers who admired The West Wing for its ethical clarity, depended on consistency. To appear to excuse alleged misconduct would undercut years of advocacy. Yet to attack Busfield outright would violate the collegial restraint many actors maintain. The solution was distance paired with principle. Speak about values. Avoid personal defense. Let the facts stand. It was a posture that satisfied conscience, while preserving integrity. For audiences over 60, this conflict resonates because it mirrors how communities respond to moral crisis. When someone familiar falls, the first reaction is disbelief. The second is assessment. Who stands where and why? Whitford's response became a quiet marker. It reassured viewers that the values they associated with The West Wing had not evaporated with time. At the same moment, it reinforced the sense that Busfield's fall was real, not exaggerated by tabloids. This conflict earns its place on the list because it completes the arc of isolation. Melissa Gilbert represented emotional devastation. Aaron Sorkin embodied professional erasure. Ken Olin reflected comparative loss. Martin Sheen symbolized moral distance. Bradley Whitford added something sharper: peer judgment without spectacle. No speeches, no attacks, just the withdrawal of public alignment. In Hollywood, that withdrawal is often the final verdict. For Busfield, the implication was unavoidable. When colleagues who share your history choose principle over proximity, the narrative hardens. Rehabilitation becomes harder. Trust takes longer to rebuild. And for an audience that values character as much as performance, Whitford's restraint confirmed what many had begun to accept. This was not a temporary stumble. It was a fracture that extended across every layer of Busfield's world: marriage, career, friendship, and legacy. And once those layers separate, they rarely return to their original shape. Looking back at the arc of Timothy Busfield's career, what stands out most is not ambition, arrogance, or hunger for power. It is expectation. For decades, he benefited from a rare privilege in Hollywood, being assumed decent. Audiences trusted him instinctively. Colleagues described him as professional, calm, and reliable. That trust became a kind of armor, one he never realized he was wearing until it shattered. What makes Busfield's collapse so unsettling for viewers over 60 is that it does not follow the familiar script of excess or ego. He was not known for cruelty. He did not cultivate fear. His downfall was quieter, and therefore more disturbing. It forces a question many people avoid. What happens when a good man fails not publicly, but morally? When disappointment replaces anger, there is no clear villain to confront, only a broken image to reconcile. Each fractured relationship tells a different version of the same story. Melissa Gilbert represents the emotional cost, the innocent party left to carry shame she did not create. Aaron Sorkin reflects professional consequence, where legacy outweighs loyalty. Ken Olin embodies comparison and quiet displacement. Martin Sheen stands for moral distance, and Bradley Whitford completes the circle with pure judgment, silent, restrained, and final. Together, these fractures reveal a truth Hollywood rarely admits. Scandal does not destroy careers on its own. What destroys them is the withdrawal of trust. Once people stop defending you, not out of hatred, but out of discomfort, the fall accelerates. Busfield's case illustrates how quickly goodwill evaporates when character becomes uncertain. This story does not end with resolution or redemption. It ends with reflection. Many viewers will feel sympathy, others will feel disappointment, but few will feel indifference. Because Timothy Busfield was never sold as a legend or a rebel. He was sold as one of us, and when someone who looks ordinary falls, the impact cuts deeper. It reminds us that reputation is not built on talent alone, but on the fragile belief that decency will hold when tested. When that belief breaks, silence fills the space where admiration once lived.